everybody? It's the king of all wrestling media, Gene Jackson, here with you for another episode of Old School Dives. As tonight we are going to talk about the one and only exotic Adrian Street. So, further ado, let's bring on the co-host, the one and only Shane Noles. How you doing tonight, Shane?
I am wonderful. How are you, Gene?
Doing well, man. Doing well. It was a long day at work today, so I'm a little worse for wear, but I've been in for a little while. You've come straight in from work, so kudos to you for coming right in and jumping right into it. But we've got an interesting subject of tonight's show. What do you want to say to get this one going here?
Well, unlike some of our other subjects that I can do an impression of, I'm not sure I could do an impression of one Adrian Street, except, folks, I think we're going to talk about somebody that this is just me personally. I don't know if Gene would agree. I describe him as Gorgeous George meets William Regal.
That is insanely accurate. I don't
I
think
mean, you think about it.
anybody could argue that. I mean, he's a guy, and I put it in the description, but I mean, he kind of checks all the boxes in wrestling as far as he's a guy with a gimmick. You know, he's got a very specific, gimmick, over the top gimmick, and most of the time in wrestling, especially back in that era, most people had an over the top gimmick to kind of cover up the fact that maybe they weren't overly capable in the ring. To kind of cover up where they lacked as far as wrestling ability, or toughness, things of that nature. But I mean, Adrian Street is the opposite of that. Adrian Street had this over the top gimmick, but I mean, he could pretty much tie anybody in a knot inside the ring. Great technical wrestler and tough as nails. I mean, he could handle himself outside the ring as well. Like, there was pretty much nothing this guy couldn't do.
Yeah, when you start hearing about a guy, working over in the United Kingdom that was working in those carnival tents and at the fairs and, where you were being challenged and ridiculed by, ticket buying customers in a much different fashion, I think, than what takes place over here in the United States. So learning to literally fight for your survival from day one. And we'll get into it, but I mean, his backstory with, what his father had imagined for him and what he became, two completely different paths.
And not to excuse me, not to jump ahead, but I'm gonna put a picture up here in just a moment that kind of illustrates what you're talking about, because Adrian Street's father was a coal miner for 51 years, and so they they took this picture, and I believe at one point Adrian did work with him in the coal mines for a little bit. Decided that wasn't for him, but they took this picture here. There's his father in the coal mine, in his coal miner regalia there, and then there's Adrian in all his glory there, full on exotic Adrian Street. Boy, that's something, right?
I mean, Loretta Lynn made famous the song Coal Miner's Daughter, Adrian Street, a coal miner's son, and looking just like Gene Simmons heading down underground there.
That yeah, that's something else. But I mean, like you say, I mean, that's a unique way to get started over there in the carnivals in England, and anybody that's studied up on you mentioned Gorgeous George crossed with William Regal. William Regal ended up having a very similar background in the business as Adrian, coming into wrestling in much the same way. And anybody who, if you haven't ever read Regal's book, I highly recommend it. It's very, very interesting. And there are a lot of parallels between the career of William Regal and Adrian Street. And Adrian, a lot of people may not know this, Adrian has written like 6 books, spanning from around 2012 up to about 2015 or 16. There's one of them there, Merchant of Menace, but there's, I think, 6 total. You can find them on eBay, so I suggest checking them out. They're very, very interesting and insightful, going into the entire life of Adrian, outside of wrestling, and of course his wrestling career. I mean, him and his valet, which is his wife Linda, a jack of all trades in wrestling. I mean, wrestlers. They made gear. They've made albums. We'll talk about that a little more later on. His musical abilities, if you will. Um, I mean, they were everything you could be in wrestling in the 80s. They defined all of it, wouldn't you say?
I would say, and trendsetters. We'll get into that too. I mean, not just making gear, maybe not a trendsetter, but books and songs and music videos. A lot of those, which are on YouTube for this day, thankfully. And you mentioned Miss Linda. There's still people to this day in the state of Alabama and Georgia that I would talk to that are maybe over the age of 50, and they'll still tell you, Miss Linda ain't his wife. And I'm like, actually, he is. They still want to believe that Adrian is There's no way he would be married to a woman, you know.
I mean, how many burly rednecks over the years got owned in parking lots and bars and out in public because they're like, "There's Sissy, I'm gonna whoop his ass," and then go and just get destroyed by.
I know.
That'll never not be hilarious to me.
Well, and, touching on it, him debuting in 1957 over in the United Kingdom, coming over to the States, and I think his biggest success in the States was in Continental, which was in the state of Alabama. So if Adrian in the late 70s, early 80s had debuted in Portland, New York, Detroit, I'm sure he would have gotten over. But man, you're talking the deep South in the 70s and 80s when I say we, where we live in our proximity, certainly we're not as tolerant to that alternative lifestyle, if you will, that Adrian Street was portraying during that time. I mean, even now, there's still tons of people that, aren't tolerant. But I'm thinking back to the 70s and 80s, like the hate, the pure vile that was thrown his way just for walking out of the curtain looking the way he dared to look.
I don't think people of a certain age can really understand and appreciate just how strong the feelings ran, how deeply the feelings ran people had about that sort of thing back in that day. It was a bold choice for a guy to take that on as a gimmick, especially when that wasn't really his lifestyle. He was doing it for heat. He was doing it to make people uncomfortable. I mean, I've seen in an interview where they said, because he started out, his gimmick was like Hell's Angel, and
Mm-hmm.
he played a bit of a tough guy, and then one night he just kind of did this kind of effeminate gimmick. I don't even know what really brought it on, but he said it was the most reaction he had ever gotten, and said he really didn't have to do anything because people were just so riled up just by his appearance and his actions that he decided, hey, we're going to run with this. This is the way to go. And that was over in England. And like you say, you come to Alabama in the late 70s, early 80s with that. Oh my gosh, it's a wonder. I mean, you hear all the stories from Cornette and different people, about, Louisiana and the Mid-South territory. It's a miracle that Adrian's not one of these guys that didn't get stabbed or shot at or, Lord knows, doing that gimmick. Because back then, I mean, people, like I say, people say what they want to now about, people feeling persecuted and people not comfortable being able to come out and be who they are. But back then, I mean, it was a complete necessity that a lot of people stayed completely 100% in the closet and didn't tell anybody
Mm-hmm.
because it could ruin your life. You lose your job, and just, it is pretty crazy to look back on it now. And like I said, for somebody to take that on, intentionally, just for the heat, is
Well,
a bold move.
and you talked about how many fans would try him. I think not a combination, the pigtails of the hair, the makeup, the outlandish, vibrant colors. But Adrian Street's 5'7". This was not a 6'4", 6'5" guy doing this. So certainly I would think a lot of people thought, oh, I can take that guy.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember my dad taking me and my buddy Brad to the Lavender Coliseum in Columbus for a Continental show, and it was one of the matches with the feud where Adrian was feuding with Wildcat Wendell Cooley, and everybody loved them some Wildcat Wendell
Hmm.
Cooley, and he had said some pretty derogatory things. He made that video. There's something very strange about a cowboy, and, and said some pretty outlandish stuff on TV. So by the time we got to the house show in Columbus, I mean, as he come down that aisle, I mean, as probably at that time about a 9-year-old kid, 8, 9-year-old kid. I mean, I heard some language and things said to that man I had never heard before in my life. And you could just see it in people's eyes. Like if they could just get across that, and it wasn't even a rail, it's just the little rope, you know, if they could just get their hands on him, they would have killed that guy, you know, and just, he pushed buttons like nobody else at that time. And I tell you what, along those lines, if you look back to Mid-South around this same era, because he kind of bounced around in the mid to late 80s. He kind of bounced around Continental, Mid-South, Memphis, all around that time, because guys did that. They would come in and out of those, especially those three territories, because they were all in the vicinity, you know. They did that angle on Mid-South TV where he was wrestling Terry Taylor for the television title when the television was a big gold medal. And for the finish, he kisses Terry Taylor right on the mouth and ends up winning the title. And then you go back and look at it now on the network or Peacock or whatever you call it now. And I mean, that's not a huge deal, but you got to understand on television at that time in that territory, especially a show that Bill Watts was running, because that's not something Bill
Watts right
would have condoned.
Speaking of something strange about a cowboy,
yeah, that was heavy. I mean, that was a big deal, and I've heard Watts and Cornette talk about in interviews like the amount of mail and calls and things the TV stations across the territory got. You know, and Watts was like, you can never do anything like that again. Oh my God, we almost lost. I mean, they almost got kicked off the TV in several.
And I'm sure we have an audience who skewers older with old school guys, but if you not just think about that, you didn't have social media with a laptop, a tablet, or even a phone to go right to express your opinion. You had to take the time to call the station, maybe get a busy signal, or take the time with pencil, pen, or paper, write your scathing letter and send it in. You know, that.
Yeah, that's something people can't appreciate now either. Like the younger generations, like, oh, that sucked. I'm going to hop on Twitter or Facebook and I'm going to vent about it. And then I'll go to bed and feel better. Like when they were sitting there in their house enraged, that's all they could do. They had to write a letter to the TV station or the newspaper or get on the phone and call. And that's how you had to express your your outrage when it came to things like that. And so let's get a look. This would be around that time of when he won the TV title from Terry Taylor, and then there's another look at him and Linda, and you know, Linda could hold her own. You know, she was pretty stiff when she would interfere in the matches. You know, they got a lot of heat from that too, because when she, you know. Adrian distracts the referee and she's over there wailing on Wendell Cooley and choking him and all that. I don't think she gets enough credit for how big a part she played in that whole act. You know,
she didn't just stand there.
No, she wasn't Miss Elizabeth played her part. She was great, but I mean, she wasn't just standing over there with Adrian hiding behind her for 2 spots in the match. Like she got her stuff in.
You know, and I think, you know, a lot of people I've heard talk about Jimmy Garvin and his wife, Patty, better known as his valet, Precious, one of the rare wrestling couples that stayed together. Adrian Street and Miss Linda have been together longer than those two.
Yes.
And Jimmy Garvin and Precious, we're talking 35 plus. I think, you know, they're over 4 decades.
Yes, they are. And together to this day. And as a matter of fact, this is kind of, I guess, jumping ahead to some degree. Where's it at? Well, maybe I didn't upload it. Never mind.
And while you're looking back, just a bizarre jump here. Out of everybody on their shoot names, for me, when I found out that Adrian Street's real name is Adrian Street, I was shocked. I thought it has to be something like Lawrence Olivier Kazmaier or something. He's really Adrian Street, so it just plays beautiful, you know.
I know, that's so crazy. I'm the same way. I never would have imagined that, but kind of like Harley Race. But let's see here.
And I sent you a picture. I don't know if you got it, Gene.
I did. I actually had it. I had it uploaded already, but we can talk about that
Okay.
right now if you want.
Sure. I was just going to say, like, to me, is when I'd seen Adrian Street on Continental around 86, 87. But it was at that time going to the video store, and there was no Blockbuster then. There wasn't even a movie gallery. We're talking like a local video hut in Carrollton, Georgia. And I see Grunt the movie with Adrian Street on the cover. And that to me magnified even more as a child. I'm like, now, again, Grunt is certainly not the Shawshank Redemption of cinema, but still, as a child, when you see a wrestler that you're watching on WBR6 on Sundays, and he's in a movie at a video store, that to me as a kid, that was like, wow, that's Tom Hanks level. You know, when you're 8, 9 years old, seeing Adrian Street in a film.
Absolutely, and if you haven't seen that, it is on YouTube. You can go on YouTube, search Grunt the wrestling movie. It's on there. I watched it 3 or 4 months ago, just randomly one Sunday night. And no, it's it's not a great piece of cinema, but it is. It's a very good representative of the '80s and you know '80s wrestling, and Adrian plays a pretty big part of it, and it's a fun story. I would definitely check it out if you have a chance. And this is what I was about to put up a minute ago. You know, we talked about Adrian and Linda still get it to this day. Me and my wife got to meet them in Atlanta at one of the
Awesome.
Greg Price's conventions there, and so there they are, and they still travel around together, and a very very happy couple. So that was cool to see.
That's awesome. And he's 81 and still in tremendous physical condition. Not for an 81-year-old, for a guy that might be 45 to 50, man. Like, yeah, in general.
We walked away, and I told my wife, like, I wouldn't cross either one of them right now. Like, I have no question if they could have took us both down right now if they needed to. Like, that's crazy. Like, but yeah, I seen Adrian wrestle on a Wrestle Birmingham show just a few
Yep.
years ago, and was still in incredible condition. Still was able to, I think he was wrestling Will Owens actually, and
Wow, thing.
take it, yeah, Wild Thing Will. That's somebody we need on the show someday. But took Will down and tied him in knots, and still had that amateur wrestling ability and stretched him. And after I talked to Will after it's over, and Will's like, "Oh man, like there's a couple times he had me, and if he hadn't let me out of it, we'd still be there now. There wasn't no getting out of it."
And I think I saw him at a couple of Wrestle Birmingham shows at the Zamora Shrine Temple in Irondale, and he had just beaten cancer, so he had lost all his hair, but he would wear the wig, and that was the great thing. If you hadn't seen him in years, you thought that was his hair, and he would get in and prance, and Linda would pop the wig off really, theatrically, and you're like, whoa, Adrian, if you didn't know the cancer story, and good for him beating him, that was a cool spot.
The first time I saw him, they got me with that, because I had not, seen him recently, and I got there late, and so I was sitting in the back, 10th row or something, and here they come, like, oh, there's Adrian Street, holy cow. And like you said, they got there, and when Linda snatched that wig off, I was like, what? Oh my god. And then later I heard the story of that he had cancer and all, which made it even more amazing seeing him in the ring and seeing what kind of condition he was in, because at that same show Bullet Bob Armstrong was there, and I'm like, here's two guys at that point were in their 70s. I'm like, they're in better shape than I've ever been in my entire life right now. They're more than twice my age. It's pretty incredible. So when you hear the name Adrian Street, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What angle or match, or just in general, what springs to mind? Is it Grunt the wrestling movie, or
Continental on Sundays for me? Also, wrestling magazines with Adrian maybe having a bloke, as he would say, twisting their jaw up against the ropes or in some kind of pretzel move. And I remember like looking at those magazines, and I'm like, no one looks like Adrian Street. Not Tommy Rich, not Ric Flair, not Dusty, not Magnum. Take your pick of anybody that was on the covers. He stood out there, the video store story, easy for me to say. But then also those grainy music videos. And I know like the Freebirds with Bad Street like to take credit, and maybe that's true, but to a lesser extent, Adrian. I mean, we're talking music videos of songs that he sang. With what we already covered, um, something very strange about a cowboy, breaking bones, sweet transvestite with a broken nose, and then the one that he used on those Wrestle Birmingham shows. Imagine what I could do to you. Because as soon as I heard that guitar, chunk, 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 crunching, I came out of my seat. I was like, it's
Yes.
Adrian, man. Like, oh.
I
So
mean, yeah,
that's what
that
stands
one.
out to me is multiple songs. Yeah.
I'm in love with me and stuff like that. But yeah, imagine what I could do to you was the one, like you said, when even back in Continental, going to those shows in Columbus, when you heard the first few chords of that, like you knew who was coming.
Hmm.
And the thing, I guess, the first thing I think of for whatever reason is, growing up, Gordon Soley was just, the picture of what a journalist is, of like the serious wrestling commentator, interviewer. And a lot of times when you'd watch WWF and different ones, you would see interviewers get a little rattled by the wrestlers, but Gordon never seemed to. He was just always
Hmm.
straight laced. But there were times when Adrian would mess with him, and say things that you could see visibly just made Gordon like so uncomfortable. And for whatever reason, that just really stands out in my mind. Is like it seemed like Adrian was one of the few people who could really rattle Gordon Soley, and he'd kind of lose track of where they were at in the interview at
Hmm.
times. But
Now,
you know,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt
go
you.
ahead, go ahead.
I saw the documentary that WWE Network, still now on Peacock, did about Adrian that was all of what, 22, 23 minutes.
Yeah,
And I knew that there had been a new documentary that was in the works, and I guess it's already came out in 2019 called The Adrian Street Story. You May Be Pretty, but I Am Beautiful. This one is an hour and 13 minutes long, but I have not seen this one yet. Have you had the chance to?
I haven't either, and I need to be kicked for that. I need to just go on and pay for it on Amazon or wherever it's at
Mhm.
and see it, because when I heard it was being made, I was really excited, and I got my wires crossed. I heard they were making a full on Adrian Street documentary, and then I come across the 20-minute thing on WWE, and I'm like, really? That's all it was? And I found
Yeah.
like, no, that's not it. That's just something they threw together. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, I really wish I could have watched it before we did this.
Well, the tagline got me. It said, "Before David Bowie and Boy George, there was Adrian, a British cult icon that went on to inspire audiences internationally, even with the look of Elton John." That's what we're describing here for those that aren't familiar with the
Yeah, I
look of.
mean, you said that in the beginning. That he was kind of ahead of his time and kind of a trailblazer in a lot of things. And yeah, I mean, a lot of that glam rock stuff. He kind of led the way for a lot of that. Most people think, oh, he was just copying Bowie, but not necessarily. He predated some of that in a lot of ways. So, you know, I don't think he gets enough credit for what he contributed, not just to professional wrestling, but like pop culture in that
Yeah.
time.
And imagine, not imagine what I could do to you, but at one of those shows at Wrestle Birmingham, of course, I lost this in a house fire with a ton of other memorabilia. Had a chance to meet him and Linda and get his autobiography signed, bought the book from him. And imagine if he had not went with the exotic Adrian Street, because his first gimmick was like Kid Tarzan
Yes.
in the 1950s. And he was talking about in the book about, with the whatever they call it, that one piece for Tarzan that you think of the old Johnny Weissmillers. But then he said I started adding little elements, prancing little things here and there, and that got more of a response than anything I was doing in that character. And he said that's when it just started to build of what can I get away with? How far can I push that envelope?
And he just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And we brought up Shake, Wrestle, and Roll, the album of all those
What
songs.
I would not give to have that. Oh,
I have gotten edged out like in just the last minute on eBay. I've had that thing nearly won like 3 different times and lost
oh.
out in the last couple of minutes. But I will have that one of these days to hang on the wall, like the Pile Driver album you see hanging back there behind me. But those videos, if you go on YouTube, there's playlist with like all those videos on there, and I got on there and watched some of them the other day. It's funny, if nothing else, go watch the video of "Imagine What I Could Do to You" and listen to the lyrics of it. Like it's like, you know, I can tear a telephone directory in two. Bending iron bars is something else that I can do.
What is it? Something I can whip someone with one hand tied behind my back?
They're pretty funny. If you listen to the actual lyrics of a lot of those songs, what was it? Mighty Big Girl for Her Age. That one that was pretty crazy lyrics too. But something.
What was the one in the video? I don't think it was "Imagine What I Could Do." It may be "I Am Beautiful." Is that the one where he's singing into the mirror of his own reflection?
"I'm in Love with Me" is that one.
Yeah, I'm in love with
that
me.
one sprang to mind a minute ago because that was one of the ones I watched the other day. Yeah, he's just singing to himself in the mirror, and it's got some pretty funny lyrics as well. So make sure you check that one out. You know, we talked about him being in Continental, and there he is with the Southeastern Heavyweight title that he won 6 times altogether. And so when he won that belt, the strap was actually white, and he painted it pink. And Wendell, actually, he may not have won it. I think he stole it from Wendell Cooley and then painted it pink. And then Cooley was upset. You know, he came out on TV and he was upset about it. And then eventually Adrian won it from him, and it was pink throughout his run as champion. But yeah, that was something I remember really stood out to me as a kid. You know, that he takes the belt and he goes and paints it pink, and then Cooley was mad and like, "Well, I paid my belt" and all that. But let's see, we got a couple comments here. Let's check them out. Chris Vick says, "What's up, Shane? It's Ref Spanky, aka Chris Vick. First time listen, great podcast." Well, thanks for listening, Chris. That's awesome, man.
Thanks for listening, man.
We got J-Mo, love the Double Dare shirt, Shane. Look at
that. Well, you guys give Gene some comments and some props here too. No, he's got the Pile Driver album behind him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to brag or anything, but
you know, that's the only WWE release that was never put on CD.
That's fun fact.
Because the wrestling album, Full Metal, all of those, the music's volume 1, 2. I don't know why Pile Driver, because I found that out the hard way. It's only cassette tape or vinyl. So.
I remember I got the cassette tape of that for Christmas when I was a kid, and just played the fire out of it. And I had the wrestling album too, because you know it had Real American on there and all that good stuff. Yeah, I was a full-on wrestling mark back in the day. I had all that good stuff. But,
you and me both, man.
And that gives us plenty to talk about on here. We're going to get around to all that eventually. But we'll go through a couple of these pictures here. There's and speaking of Mid-South, there's Adrian in Mid-South with the mirror. And this was something I didn't really realize because I didn't get to see a lot of Florida territory back in the day. But Linda and Adrian were managed by J.J. Dillon down in Florida for a brief time down there.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I had no idea. But, yeah, I thought that was kind of a fun fact. But there we go. But anyway, I don't know. I did a poor job preparing for this. I didn't make a lot of notes, which I probably should have, but again, we don't really follow a timeline. I mean, this podcast would be 4 hours long if we covered the entire career of Adrian Street, but we more just want to kind of discuss people and kind of tell
we're doing like that. We're doing like that company in North Carolina. We're going to hit the high spots.
That's right, hitting the high spots. And
one thing I noticed, I'm sorry, in my research, we were talking about him making gear, and to this day, I did not know that he made the gear for Mick Foley as the Dude Love persona.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
During the feud with Stone Cold, I was like, "What? That was really cool."
That's fun. Yeah, he made a lot of gear. He made belts. Most of the belts for that Wrestle Birmingham promotion were all made by Adrian. If you go back and check some of it.
It's funny you say about belt, Gene. I got to share this story. I don't have any personal stories with Adrian Street. Never worked on a show with him other than seeing him as a fan or meeting him at the book sign. But that first pro wrestling, and you said made a belt, that first pro wrestling live show we did in Gadsden, Alabama in May, which, Gadsden was a hot spot for Continental. I am friends with Adrian Street on Facebook. And again, I've already prefaced it by saying, we haven't had any personal interaction as friends. But when he saw that poster for Pro Wrestling Live, he said, commented, "Good to see wrestling back in Gadsden. I think I made a belt for you once." And I'm like, "No, no, you didn't, but I appreciate it."
That's awesome. Oh, we lost Shane there for a minute.
I
There
don't
he
know what
is.
happened there.
We're doing better than we usually do. Usually we cut out 2 or 3 times right in the beginning, so we're rolling along. We're rolling along pretty good here. So, but another thing, we talked about Adrian's, effect on wrestling. In the latter part of his WWE career, Rico Constantino basically
Mhm.
just did a direct Adrian Street gimmick. I mean, he painted his face almost exactly the same. He pranced around. I mean, it was minus having a valet. And I was told that he actually went down to Florida and Adrian coached him on it.
Mhm.
And so I thought that was pretty fun for somebody to come and do almost a tribute to him, that many years later. Because at that point, I don't remember once I can tell you a lot of exact stuff from the 80s up into the 90s, but once we get in the 2000s, it all just kind of runs together, runs together for
Right.
me. So I don't know. I just
Um,
know that was in the 2000s.
and not just Rico, but to a closer extent to us, I'm sure you're familiar with the wrestler Simon Sermon.
Yes, absolutely.
Simon Sermon, his favorite wrestler of all time is Adrian Street. And I'd never met someone whose favorite wrestler was Adrian. You always meet a Hogan, a Flair, a Dusty, a John Cena, a Rock, whatever. The day I met him, because he had been doing the British gimmick, much like Adrian, that I didn't pick up on, with the elaborate, winged robes. But then when he went to the tag team, the Exotic Ones with Rick Michaels, and of course the Exotic One, Adrian Street, I asked him, he's like, "Yeah, he's my favorite." And I didn't, Simon gave me a copy of his documentary that came out in 2006 about the profile of an openly gay pro wrestler that is available on Amazon, as he will tell you. But what I was shocked, there's an interview with Adrian Street in that DVD.
Oh wow.
And I'm just going to go even further here. Having never, I went as a fan for a show in 2014 because now he's living back over in Wales, I believe, part of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Adrian was living in Dothan, Alabama, and Mike Jackson. What had happened was the Exotic Ones, Rick Michaels and Simon Sermon, were involved in a 6-man versus Mike, and I can't remember his 2 partners. That's not important to the story per se, but Adrian Street to come be the partner. And I thought how happy that must have made Simon, because not only is that your favorite wrestler of all time, your look, everything from when you started as a British nobleman now to an Exotic One with the makeup and the prancing and coming out to the Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams Are Made of These. And so they did the tag, and Adrian, after the match, and I hope Simon doesn't get mad for me sharing this, but that's what we do. I don't think he'd mind. He took off those silver and black boots that had the silver stars, and he took a Sharpie and inscribed it on the inside. He said, "To Simon Sermon, keep the exotic tradition alive. Much love, Adrian Street." And Simon Sermon's a guy that's just all business, like a lot of people are. But I'd be like if I didn't see a tear well up in his eyes that
Oh
night sitting in
God,
the
yeah.
locker room that he has Adrian's boots from his last match in 2014, where he got to tag with his wrestling hero. And that's amazing.
I mean, how awesome is that? I mean, you know what I mean? That's cool as hell. And it's one thing to go buy, stuff like that, but I mean, to have the guy himself sign it and give it to you like that. I mean,
Yes.
that's super cool, man.
Because Simon was like, "I don't keep hardly anything from my wrestling career. Titles are titles, whatnot." But he's like, those boots are, in a case. They are. And because I'm like, wow, man, he gave you the boots and signed them to you.
Wow, that's super awesome, man. So to kind of follow up on what we were talking about before, and just to kind of really touch on how talented Adrian was in that same era we were just talking about earlier in the 80s. By now, this would have been 87 ish, moving into 88, but I think it started in 87. Adrian was so good in front of those same audiences in Alabama, in continental Mississippi. he managed to turn babyface with
Yes.
that same gimmick, and that if anything in the world, because like you said, that people, the majority of the crowd felt that way and did not approve of that lifestyle and all that went with it, and religious beliefs and all that sort of thing. But he was so talented, he managed to turn babyface, and people in the latter part of his stay in Continental loved Adrian. And of course, he feuded with the Hustler Rip Rogers and Miss Brenda,
Mhm.
and they had the mixed tag matches and all that sort of thing. And
Didn't
he
he
was
turn
pretty much
babyface?
babyface. Yeah, he's pretty much babyface for the rest of his career for the most part after that.
Didn't he turn baby by saving Bullet Bob from like Fuller and Golden, if I
Yep,
remember right, something like?
sure
Because that
did.
was just like, what? Like,
Yeah,
Adrian Street's doing this? Like,
he came back into the territory, and everybody, you assume he's going to be heel, and then later in the show, Fuller and Golden are beating down the Bullet. And I forget the scenario, but it was pretty much established that Brad's not around, Steve's not around, there's nobody here to help him. And then here comes Adrian Street, and people are thinking, well, he's going to join in. That son of a,
mhm.
and then he saves him, and everybody's like, oh my God. Of course, you know, gay, straight, whatever, you save Bullet Bob, that wins you a lot of points in Alabama. you know?
Yes, and I think back to those Wrestle Birmingham shows when you said pretty much was a babyface the rest of his career. These would have been '06, '07, '08. Bullet Bob would get the pop for the opening strains of Bad to the Bone, but man, Dennis Condrey and Adrian Street may have been the only people I ever saw rival Bullet
Yeah,
Bob's popularity around that Birmingham area for years of appreciation of recognizing the career.
absolutely. I mean, I used to love, because I was such a fan of Continental growing up. I used to love going to those Wrestle Birmingham shows and some of those Continental reunion things they did. Because man, like you say, obviously Bad to the Bone plays and everybody's gonna lose their mind. It's the Bullet. But for Adrian, when them first, first riff of Imagine What I Could Do to You, people would come out of their chairs
Mhm.
and he would get a pop that rivaled, Bob Armstrong every time.
And
And
I'm thinking on this, Adrian Street, I'm sure there were people before him. He's the first guy I remember throwing forearms instead of punches. And yeah, I'm going to take a shot at some of the day. Those forearms didn't look like shit. They looked like they would brutalize you because they
oh yeah,
probably were. I mean,
that was. I mean, I remember thinking even as a kid when you know, you didn't know how any of it was done, but your mother would tell you, "Oh, that stuff's fake. Why are you watching it?" And everybody would go, "Oh yeah, that stuff's fake." And you see 2020 or whatever, but you didn't know how anybody did it. I remember even as a kid watching Adrian Street matches, man, I'm like, man, them forearms look rough. Like he's rough. There were certain guys, Adrian Street on Continental, and one. I remember it from back then. I go back and watch them now. This is off topic, but on that subject, those old TBS shows, watching Ronnie Garvin get a hold of those job guys and just stretch them and chop them and just beat and of course, obviously the Road Warriors, yeah. But you could just tell after watching a string of, you see Tully and you see Arn, you see the Rock and Roll Express, and then all of a sudden it comes back from commercial and there's Ronnie Garvin. He throws that towel out and then he just commits to I mean, you just felt bad for the guy. Even as a kid, I was like, golly, that is rough, man.
I
I
know.
remember thinking back then, I was like, I wish Ronnie Garvin would come to Continental or Adrian would come to Jim Crockett, because I would love to see them two, fight. Which, come to find out later on, I found out that before I started watching it, Adrian had been there. I don't think those two ever tied up necessarily, but boy, that would have been some hard hitting uh, wrestling right there.
And you're talking about crossing promotions back then. We've brought this up. We'll probably talk about it a million times on this podcast. Joe Pedicino and Bonnie Blackstone's Superstars of Wrestling. I'm so fortunate, so thankful that as a kid, my parents let me watch that, let me know that it was going on, because you're not just watching the NWA into WCW. You're not just watching the WWF. You're getting Portland, Don Owens, you're getting world class, all that stuff. So that's why I would see Adrian. I remember in third and fourth grade, Hulk Hogan's the talk, and Tito Santana Junkyard Dog. I'm like, you guys seen the exotic Adrian Street? Kids like, oh, what's that? He's not on WWF, and I'm like,
Mean Adrian Adonis? I'm like,
yeah, exactly. I couldn't
not
think
the
to
bad
tell
guy.
them it's on Continental Wrestling out of our own state. I wasn't well spoken as much then, but I was like, this guy's pretty cool. He's incredible. He dresses like nobody else. He wrestles like nobody else.
Yeah, I mean, man, I didn't have any access to that where I was at when I was a kid. Like, it wasn't until I got into tape trade and I used to get some of those old Pro Wrestling This Weeks and Superstars of Wrestling, and I was like, you mean when I was a kid, if I lived near Atlanta, I could have seen Memphis and Portland and Continental and all these different territories? Like, holy crap, that would have been amazing. Which, I mean, I got to see my fair share between Memphis and Continental and World Class and AWA and WWF and all that. But there were still some ones that, I mean, I think we've talked about here before that I only had knowledge of from magazines.
And if I'm not mistaken, Eastern time that aired from 8 Eastern to 2 a.m., 7 to 1 Central, because you had all those promotions that would send in a 1 hour TV show. You would get WWF Spotlight or Wrestling Challenge. You
Yeah.
wouldn't get Superstars or whatnot. But then, WCW might send in the Power Hour, or you would even get Georgia Wrestling Federation with Joe Pedicino promoting that actually. Don Owens, and of course, we would get a Continental and all that. And it was just, I'm like you. I want to go back now and get some. I've got some recorded on VHS, but man, we're talking like some old 1986, 87, 88, where I figured out what the REC button meant. Probably taped over somebody's Christmas and graduation.
Once I got a VCR, I started trying to record everything I could get my hands on, and wish I'd held on to a lot of them tapes, but I managed to get a lot of it tape trading back in the day and go back and see a lot of that stuff I had only read about and only heard about. So that was pretty cool. I wish more people like involved in the business now would just go back and watch a lot of that stuff and study a lot of that stuff. I mean, yeah, you got to incorporate a lot of the moves and the style, but there's a lot of stories that you could pick up aspects of. You don't have to rip them off altogether, but I mean, you can pick up different aspects of stories and characters and things that worked back then that would be completely new to 98% of anybody that's seen it on a show today. They would have no idea where you got it from. And what's fun is some of these guys do that. I mean, there's times I see something like, I recognize that. Hell yeah, that's awesome.
Let me ask you this: with them being WWE, doing that documentary, I believe in 2018, might have been 2017, on Adrian. I don't think they just do things just for the hell of it, because I just wonder, would they induct him into the WWE Hall of Fame? Because it seems to be a little bit more lenient sometimes in recent years, that you didn't have to have a run in New York to be enshrined.
Yeah, because I mean, you look at guys like Bob Armstrong and Abdullah the Butcher, and there's quite a few guys that never set foot in a WWE ring, to my knowledge, that are in there. And yeah, I definitely, when I saw that, I thought, hey, we're paving the way to get Adrian in the WWE Hall of Fame. And I don't know if maybe it's just a matter of him being over there and they just haven't had the opportunity, because he hasn't been in the States to do it. But I mean, he absolutely deserves it. Like I say, he's influenced a lot of different people over the years, and like I say, some in large ways, the Simon Sermons and Ricos of the world, but in smaller ways, there's certain nuances of different people over the years. You watch them go, I think I know where they got that, So I definitely would. I'd love to see him go in, and I hope it happens while he's still around. One of these legacy ones, where it's like it's mentioned in between. There's 10 guys that we've thrown in here because we didn't ever get around to it.
I thought that was so disrespectful to Lord Alfred Hayes, a man who worked for that company many years, was just kind of thrown in the legacy wing, along with about, like you said, 9 other people, and barely even mentioned.
Yeah, that's very disrespectful. And I loved me some Lord Alfred Hayes back in the day. Like, and I've never, I don't know. I mean, I've seen clips, but I can't say I've ever seen an entire match, a Lord Alfred Hayes match. I've seen some clips of his in ring. I've seen I guess the funniest clip I've ever seen, and it was only a short one. I had read about it, and finally, in a compilation tape I traded for one time, there was a little clip of it when he was in. I guess this was Mid Atlantic. Jimmy Valiant had a short run as King James with Lord
Mm-hmm.
Alfred Hayes as his manager. And I only saw, I mean, literally, it was less than a minute clip. And I would love to find something longer of it because that sounds hilarious to me. That sounds like a segment from TNT in the 80s that should have happened was, King James Valiant and Lord Alfred Hayes.
And I was so amazed to learn that our lovable Lord Alfred Hayes was such a despised, despicable heel in his wrestling career. And that masterpiece theater diction that we loved as he, talk gorilla about you. I can't do it now, my voice is shot, but that is what, much like Nick Botwinkle talking down to audiences with his extensive vocabulary and accent, got him instant heat.
Yeah, because I only knew him as just the fun comedy character, the sidekick on TNT, and this doing commentary and promotional consideration paid for by the following, and
Hmm.
to learn later on that he was a vicious heel at one time. Like Lord Alfred, no, it couldn't be.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of fun Lord Alfred Hayes stories out there once you get to digging that we won't go into here. I don't know. Maybe he can be the subject of a show one day. But yeah.
Wow.
But I know I know we're currently looking for our next topic of our next episodes. Again, we've put this out there, but again, if you're watching the show, whether you're watching it live or you watch it after the fact, or you're just listening to it on Anchor, if you have any suggestions, please send them our way. You can contact me or Shane on Facebook or whatever means you see to do it, Twitter or what have you. We're looking possibly at the next show being maybe covering some sort of event, like a old school event, be it an event or an old maybe like Coliseum video or something like that. Neil Taylor says Gino Hernandez. That might be an um,
Mm.
interesting episode for sure. I know they covered him pretty well on Dark Side of the Ring, but I mean, kind of one aspect of his life and career. So yeah, Neil, that's definitely somebody we could look into. And that's another guy too, man. Like people, who are getting in the business or in the business, and looking for inspiration for character and Gino Hernandez is a great place to start. Man, he's so underrated, and he just hasn't been exposed to a big audience. But man, you go back and watch Southwest Wrestling, his tag team with Tully Blanchard. Then you go back and watch World Class, his the dynamic duo with Chris Adams and their feud with the Von Erichs. That's some fun stuff. And another, Neil Taylor suggests the WWF big event. That is definitely a possibility.
Orndorff Hogan, Toronto, is there?
Heck yeah! I mean, because that checks both boxes. That's an event as well as a Coliseum video, because that's where I first saw it when I got my very first VCR for Christmas when I was a kid. My parents had got me a VCR, and they went to the store and rented me like 4 wrestling videos, and those videos were the big event, the Great American Bash 1986. Um, Jake the Snake Roberts Coliseum video, and WrestleMania 2 were the 4, and I watched them just back to back to back to back over and over again until I had to return them. And Great American Bash 86 is one of my favorite VHS tapes to this day, but the big event also is a huge favorite of mine. I loved the Hogan and Orndorff feud. We've kind of touched on it here, and I know me and Shane have talked about it off the air. How much that angle of Orndorff turning on Hogan's is kind of burned in my head. And so seeing that play out and them two having that big match in such a big venue in front of that huge audience. But the biggest thing that that stands out to me, I remember watching that VHS, is, for the finish, Hogan goes to pile drive Orndorff, and Heenan's going to come in with a stool and hit Hogan in the back of the head. Well, the timing was off, and Hogan held him there in the pile driver position for an uncomfortably long time before Heenan finally come in and nailed him, with the stool. Mm-hmm. And you think, okay, well, whew, I mean, this wasn't live. We could have, fixed that in editing. Then they show the freaking replay, and they replay it in slow motion. And in what seems like 6 minutes, he just holds him.
We're going to make sure you know.
And even as in 1986, I was 9 years old. And even as a 9-year-old, I'm like, whew, that took a long time. Mm-hmm. Another great suggestion from Neil Taylor, Hulkamania 3. Says that's one of his first VHS he watched. And I distinctly remember that. That's the VHS that covered the whole Andre the Giant turn. And
didn't they get up to 5 of those? The Hulkamania 5, I think they're Coliseum.
Yeah, they got to. They had Hulkamania 4, and they had Hulkamania 5, and then they had Hulkamania Forever, which was technically Hulkamania 6, I think. There ended up being 6 or 7 of them before it was over with, but I guess they thought the numbers started sounding ridiculous, so then they started giving them names after a certain point. Because Hulkamania 4 covered the Zeus no holds barred angle, and then, but what I remember most about that VHS tape, it featured Hogan versus Boss Man from Madison Square Garden, where they did the superplex spot off the top of the cage, which was just, I mean, you didn't see spots like that back then, but to see it from Hogan and Boss Man was unbelievable. And,
I mean, different story for a different time. I would put Ray Traylor, the late Ray Traylor, in Hulk Hogan's top 5 best opponents ever.
Absolutely. Ray Traylor is a guy who does not get enough credit. People talk about, best big man, and you always talk Vader, which I agree. You always talk Bam Bam Bigelow, which I agree. But Ray Traylor, if there's a top 5, I can get that lined up there. Ray Traylor has got to be in that top 5, be it top big man or top opponents for Hogan or whomever. I mean, Ray Traylor was such a talented guy and could work. I mean, he worked like a big man, but he could move like a guy less than half his size. Mm-hmm. I mean,
he could do that big, roundhouse kick.
Yeah. He would do that punch, and then, like you say, come around with that roundhouse. It was crazy.
For a man of his stature. Yeah.
Absolutely. But, yeah, I don't think he gets enough credit. I think people get too hung up on him being a gimmick. We talked about before that a lot of times back in the day, gimmicks were trying to cover up, people being maybe lacking some. But, I mean, he didn't lack anything. I mean, Big Bubba was a talented guy, but I mean, Big Bubba was not a great gimmick. But once he became Big Boss Man, he was a main event,
Well, I think, Gene, if you're cool with it, we can cover an event next time. I think Ray Traylor needs to be our next profile on Old School Dives.
Yeah, the next singular Old School Dives, we will cover Ray Traylor. I think as for an event, if you're good, I think we'll take Neil's suggestion. I think we'll cover the big event for the next episode of Old School Dives, which would be 5, I guess it is.
Was that the Toronto? Was that the Maple Leaf Gardens, or was that the Sky Dome in '86?
That was the C&E Stadium in Toronto. Mm-hmm. You had Hogan and Orndorff on top. You had Jake versus Ricky Steamboat. You had Bundy Stud and Bobby Heenan against the Machines.
The Machines. So Hogan worked twice, right?
You had what else was on that card? I know he had like the Rougeos and the Dream Team, I think, towards the beginning of the show.
Wasn't like Ted Arcidi? Wasn't he on that show?
Ted Arcidi against like Tony Gurria, like a very quick bear hug finish.
Oh, I remember there was also one more random. I don't know why this sticks out to me. I think because another guy I think we should cover. That's what we do here. Remember, like Dick Slater was in the World Wrestling Federation at that time as the name the Rebel, and he wrestled like
Rebel.
Iron Mike Sharp. And then I never saw Dick Slater
Yes.
in the WWF again.
So he was there for 2 or 3 months. And so in 1986, Vince McMahon's like, we're going to bring Dick Slater to the WWF. We're going to call him the Rebel. We're going to put a Rebel flag on him, and we're going to make him a big ass baby face. And you're like, what? I mean,
Same thing with Honky Tonk Man later in '86. You know, we'll have him out there with no shirt, suspenders, and sideburns, and the kids will love it. The kids will love it. No, they didn't.
They're gonna love the Honky Tonk Man. Like, yeah, I would love to think that was by design. They thought that they knew that was gonna play out that way. But from everything I've ever heard, like Vince was actually dumbfounded that people didn't love the Honky Tonk Man, and then they of course had to pivot and do what they did with the whole vote of confidence thing with Jesse Ventura.
Jesse.
But they said he like legit expected him to be a big babyface character. And again, like thinking that anywhere on earth that Dick Slater would be a babyface is mind blowing. But in a northern territory, to bring a guy in and call him the Rebel with a Rebel flag, and then it's Dick Slater on top of that, and think he could be like, I go back and watch. I remember it as a kid, and I go back and watch it now. I was just like, what? How in the world did that? Like you can't.
My first thought on Dick Slater.
Holy shit.
Other than being a legit tough guy, I think even before, well, not even, but certainly before William Regal, Dick Slater had the best pouty face of selling ever, where he just looked like somebody cracked in my cereal. I'm hurting. I'm in agony. Oh, it was great.
Yes, he would contort his face to just. And Neil says, the Boss Man Nails angle freaked me out as a kid. Yeah, Nails was a weird. Was a weird character, but he was the perfect.
Well, as Bobby Heenan found out, you don't talk about Boss Man's mama.
During the time he was carrying that, the ball, the big ball and chain.
Yes.
Dropped it on Bobby's chest in that one match and all that. But so we've gotten way off the beaten path on Adrian Street here. No, that's more me than anything else. But so that's what we're going to do. You've watched this come about right in front of your eyes, folks. We're going to talk about the big event on the next show, and then we're going to talk about Ray Traylor. So we got the next couple shows laid out. So that's what we're talking about, folks. You make a suggestion in the comments, boom, we make it happen. So we're here to please, and we just like talking about wrestling.
Yeah, and I would like to throw this out here too, not just Gene or I stories about either working with or going to shows with a particular person we're talking about. If you've got a personal story or a cool experience with somebody, send that to us too, because it may be something Gene and I did not attend, we weren't there and privy to, that would be beneficial to the program.
Yes, we would love to hear that. We'd love to share it. So Sunday night, we had Sal Renaro on as our guest, and that was a fun interview. And of course, Sal is a wrestling nerd on par, or maybe even more than we are. But
he loves him some Savio Vega and Ahmed Johnson, baby.
Ahmed Johnson. He said it's because Xander's is constantly inviting people on our show for us because that's what Xander's does. But so Xander's like, hey, Gene and Shane Knowles has a show called Old School Dives where they talk about old wrestling, and you should come on there with them sometime. Sal's like, hell yeah, sign me up. I would love to do that. And before he finished, he's like, and especially if you do an Ahmed Johnson episode.
I knew it.
Swear to God, he said that's why it killed me when you said that. And I was like, buddy, if we do an Ahmed Johnson episode, best believe you will be there.
You are our go-to man on the street.
And then Xander's like, just be warned, sometimes they do 2-hour episodes. I'm like, buddy, Ahmed Johnson couldn't talk about Ahmed Johnson for 2 hours. I promise you. And Sal's like, you just wait and see. But yeah, he almost started a fight on our show because amongst the Cheap Heat crew, me and Shane Mako are of the opinion that Bret Hart's one of the best of all time. He is the best there is, the best there was, the best there will be. On the other side of that coin, Charles Anders and Scott Morgan think Bret Hart's overrated. He's not as good as everybody says, and they're more in the Shawn Michaels camp because they're of the opinion you have to be in one camp or the other. I like them both. I think they're both talented. But much to Xander's delight, Sal Rinauro often says that he believes Bret Hart's overrated, and used some examples of of Bret trying to go toe to toe and throw punches with Diesel in some of their matches back in the day, and named off a couple spots in another match. And I said, okay, well, I'm not gonna debate that. Like, yeah, there was moments where Bret, maybe didn't sell things exactly like you would think or whatever. I was like, but anybody comes on this show disparaging the good name of Bret Hart, well, now we've got a problem. So me and Mako took great offense to that. And of course, Xanders and Scott were over the moon that somebody came on there and agreed with them that Bret Hart's overrated. I don't even have to ask, but since we're here, would you like to chime in on that so Xanders can F off with
that? As a teenager, when Shawn Michaels did the split with Marty Jannetty, and then, man, where he really got me was 95 WrestleMania in a losing effort against Diesel as a heel. But I started to see the greatness of Shawn Michaels. And so then I bought the Shawn Michaels shirt and Sexy Boy. That was the theme I listened to on Full Metal over and over. But I liked Bret Hart. I'd always liked Bret Hart. Just like I'd always liked Shawn Michaels. What I'm saying, I was a Shawn Michaels guy freshman year, sophomore, junior, high school. Shawn is still in my top 5. But in the last 10, 12 years, he's been passed by Bret Hart in my book as far as top 5. They're both in my top. If you're curious about my top 5, it's like a Ric Flair, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Rick Martel, and then take your pick after that because it varies depending on which way the wind blows for me that day. But I think Bret Hart's greatest testament is he never injured anybody where they couldn't work the very next night. And that's not true for a lot of guys who worked with him, Dino Bravo or Goldberg, whatnot. But I think some people think, I think they believe Bret Hart's incredibly bitter. He's honest. I like a guy that's just going to speak rather than no comment, or I'm just going to give you the Bruce Pritchard BS version to make you feel happy about yourself. I'm going to tell you. In his book, I like Shawn Michaels' books that he's written, very open about his troubled past. But Bret Hart's book to me is about one of my favorites because the fact he kept that little recorder with the microphone and night after night after night after night, it took him years to write this book to go through all of that stuff. So it's not like, when you go up to a guy, I don't know, like a couple of weeks ago in Charlotte when somebody asked Paul Roma, you remember back in 1988 in Hershey when you and Jim Powers almost, he has to be like, Bret Hart actually had the documentation of that day, how he felt, what transpired, and how he was feeling about it. But yeah, I mean, Bret ever so slightly, but like you said, it's okay to like both. I do, because you know what? I like Neapolitan. Chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, give me Flair, Bret, and Shawn. I'm fine with that.
And one of their arguments, because we had, when we were all doing our top 5 favorite wrestlers, and we were kind of arguing about that, one of the things that Xanders and him argued was that, well, Bret does the same, did the same 5 spots in every match and blah, blah, blah. And, Shawn Michaels had different matches with different people. He had a different match with Sid, and he had a different match with Foley, and he had a different match with Bret, and he had a different match with Diesel. And I get that. But Shawn had his signature moves that he did in every one of those matches that, I just listed. On
the sail, duck the clothesline, big flying forearm, nip up.
Yeah. And like I told them, because both of them, had stated, they were Flair fans. Flair was in their top 5. And I said, look, I love Ric Flair as much as anybody. But I said, people kill me that will not. And I said, I've heard Flair do it, which is crazy. I was like, but the people who will knock Bret and say Bret had the same match and then praise Flair, I'm like, I love me some Flair, but Flair had the same match over and over.
Just ask Ole Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, but I've heard Flair say that in interviews, like, oh, Bret had the same match every night. And of course, then Bret in interviews, like, well, Flair had the same match every night. Like,
let me ask you this. I don't know if you're of the same opinion, but to me, Bret as champion, when he defended the title against guys like Hakushi and the 1-2-3 Kid, those were electric matches as champion with guys who were not perceived anywhere near his level.
Yeah.
So does that stand out more to you or to me? The other aspect I'll say, Undertaker's known as a great worker now, but man, those early years working Giant Gonzalez and King Kong Bundy and Kama the Supreme, all that stuff. But I felt like it was really against Bret Hart when he's going 30, 35 minutes with Bret, where you're like, holy crap, this dead man guy can go. But I thought even though Shawn Michaels' match with Diesel at WrestleMania was at 14 was good, I thought Bret Hart got the best out of Kevin Nash in some of their matches.
He did. And I mean, the match with, well, I mean, both, I mean, like the Survivor Series match with Bret and Austin was very good. The WrestleMania match with Bret and Austin was incredible. Bret and Davey Boy at SummerSlam, especially when you hear the backstory of, you know, Davey was, you know, worse for wear. Kind of showed.
Oh, and see, the second one, In Your House 95, is one of my favorite hidden gems. I'm like, man, they did stuff in that one. I know 92 SummerSlam gets all the press, and rightfully so, but that one was solid too.
Absolutely.
When Davey had turned heel.
And a lot of times when I hear people saying stuff like that, I think it's just a matter of they are supporting a narrative that's out there, and they really weren't. And this is something else too, for younger people. And you can't help your age, you can't help what, you know, time period you grew up in or whatever. But you really can appreciate a lot of these matches, a lot of these angles going back. Even if you watch them from beginning to end, you watch all the Raws or whatever that corresponded with it. Without like you could when you were in it at the time, in context of the time period. And I think a lot of the people who knock Bret, I just don't think they were fans at that time and really got to experience, like you say, in real time compared to what was going on then, not comparing it to what they love now, and then going back and picking out a Bret Hart match from 20 years and going, oh, it's not really that good, or, oh, it's kind of formulaic or whatever. I just don't think that's really fair. But I'm like you. I mean, I thought he had matches with people who leveled up a lot of guys like Undertaker. I guess you can't really say leveled up Undertaker, he was already there, but he showed that Undertaker could work and brought out a whole nother gear or two in him that you hadn't seen. And Steve Austin, as good as he was, and there you see Neil Taylor in the comments says Bret and Steve Austin changed the business. I don't think Steve Austin goes on to be as huge as he was without those matches and that feud with Bret Hart. Right. That helped make him. I mean, yeah, he was already getting over and all that, but that brought him up to an entirely different level, that whole feud and those matches with Bret and the stories they told in those for the people. And I've heard people say this, like, I don't really get the whole telling a story in a match. Well, go watch any of the matches those two guys had. If you can't sit, put your phone down and watch those matches and not understand the story was told there, then okay, well, this ain't for you. You know, right. watch Dynamite. I don't want to tell you, but and again, you know, we went on a whole nother tirade, but I think that's what this show is. We may start out talking about one thing, but at the end of the day, this is just a show about two guys who are huge wrestling fans that enjoy talking about wrestling and reminiscing and remembering the good old days. Because there's enough podcasts out there that's talking about what's going on now. You don't need another one of them. And there's a lot of wrestling podcasts that talk about the old stuff. But it's usually guys who were in it who are telling their perspective of it. We're just telling you what our perspective of it was.
You guys need to know that Don Morocco was the original Rock.
Damn right. And the Fuji Vice was one of the best shows on television.
I still want that T-shirt.
I need that, yes. Fuji Vice, Fuji General Hospital, and Fuji Bandito were all and if you don't believe me, go watch them and then send your hate mail. All right, folks. I guess we've gone long enough. But Shane, as always, I've enjoyed it, man. It's been a fun show. And join